Hello, everyone, and welcome to Privacy Chats with Rachel and John. I'm Rachel.
I'm John. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Great. And should I let you tee up the topic today, John?
Well, sure. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about the Digital Markets Act, fairly new law in the European Union. I feel like we keep going back to the European Union. But before we get into this one,
law.
yeah, for sure. So before we get into it, I just wanted to offer a disclaimer that Rachel and I are going to be talking about stuff that we just find on the internet. We do our own research for these episodes, but we're not representing the opinions or thoughts or anything of anyone else. This is just Rachel and I talking with stuff that we find on the open internet. You can find it there yourselves.
Yep, just us chatting as we might offline, but with giant microphones and some earbuds.
Yes, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, so where are we going? Digital Markets Act.
DMA.
So the DMA. So it's actually a pair of acts that I get the impression that they were enacted together, but they it was as a package. The Digital Markets Act and the Digital Service Act. I wanted to start off with just talking about the Digital Markets Act. New EU regulation enacted in September 2022. There's a bunch of different dates of it coming into effect because of, there has to be kind of a burn-in period or something. Mm-hmm. And the best information that I could find that talked about it is the European Commission itself calls it, the tagline is the Digital Markets Act, ensuring fair and open digital markets. So sounds like they had a whole marketing team coming together to talk about
marketing team for the markets regulation.
Exactly. Yeah. So they describe it as they say that some large online platforms act as gatekeepers in digital markets. And the Digital Markets Act aims to ensure that these platforms behave in a fair way online. Together with the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act is one of the centerpieces of the European digital strategy. So that's kind of where they're coming from in the EU of what they're trying to accomplish here is make these large platforms behave fairly. So
yeah, and I learned something too when I was discussing this with someone else in the industry, that the EU frames it as competition law, and in the US it's more, what I'm used to hearing shorthand is antitrust law. So I believe those two are virtually interchangeable here. But maybe to your point, that's exactly what this is trying to cover, is making it fair and I think accessible to other competitors as well. Our main technology companies that are, I think for the most part, all gatekeepers, which I know you can get into a second, they have a very large hold on, I think, the economy through digital media and digital services. So this took a lot of interest from me when it was drafted, because it made sense, and it seems like it packages up all of the concerns that advocates, legal scholars, even consumers have been complaining about or pointing out as kind of unfair advantages that these platforms have, and their effects not just on consumers, but also, I don't know if this is the right way to put it or technical term, but the middlemen between those services. So businesses that use these platforms to communicate with consumers or sell goods. There's just so much that these technology companies are intermediaries for. So
yeah,
sense.
Agreed. And I think, getting back to your point about the different terminology that's used, my initial understanding was that it was about preventing monopolies. And some of these tech companies can get so big that it's impossible for anyone to compete against them. And I remember, this isn't new. There was I'm not going to remember the details of this, but I want to say back it had to have been the 1990s, or mid 1990s. Microsoft got in trouble, also in Europe, when they first embedded an internet browser into its Windows operating systems, and the European, Commission or whatever legal entity was in charge at the time, sued them for anti-competitive practices, saying that because the browser was an integrated part of the operating system and couldn't be separated, other browsers couldn't really be used on the computer. So you were stuck with Microsoft's browser, which was Internet Explorer, I think at the time, they might have bought like Netscape Navigator. So I'm making myself sound old because I remember all of these things.
Yeah.
But they did get in trouble in Europe and were essentially forced to separate them. So when we think of browsers today, they're not part of the operating system, but that's what Microsoft's intent was back in the beginning.
Right. And I mean, the distinction's so slight, but from an unknowing consumer, it kind of seems like that's the direction every technology company has taken outside of that very like specific use case that of course we saw and, lost something to get fined over. Probably not anything any company wanted to try again, but we're seeing now in the similar space, like there's really no search engine besides Google with as far as its capabilities and its integrations with other services. I read somewhere that Google search now has 95% of, now this was for research, but in the EU market, since we're talking about the DMA here. So, I mean, it's a lot to take in, the fact that there's one company, one service with 95% of market share, and anyone you walk across the street with wouldn't know the next search engine if you ask them, outside of the select few that are already very big within their respective communities. So what?
It's true.
Safari, and that's it. It's a very short list.
Right. Or even for search engines, like isn't Yahoo still out there? Isn't that still work?
Yeah. So that was my favorite back in the day. I mean,
back in the day, right? Okay, so let's keep going. So DMA, let's talk about who this applies to. Do you have comments, thoughts? Who does the DMA apply to?
Yes, generally gatekeepers, but this is a new term to me as far as DMA research goes. The idea is that the EU, through the European Commission, determines who is the gatekeeper based on a few criteria. So one is having a strong economic position or a significant impact to the internal market, really the EU here, and is active in multiple EU countries. The next is, has a strong intermediate position, which, to my point about middlemen earlier, it links a large population of users to a large number of businesses. And there is, many relationship with that. So you're, in a way, and this is my opinion here, kind of controlling the means of commerce or interaction on those platforms. The last that I saw was has or could have an entrenched and durable position in the market. So the company has had this sort of market share and economy of scale for a stable amount of time, and also beat the two criteria that I mentioned above, with having just a strong economic position in the EU and then being an intermediary between services. Yeah,
so I found the same ones. And just to kind of translate that a little bit, like if I was to apply those three criteria to a company, let's talk about Amazon for a minute. So obviously Amazon has a very strong economic position across the globe, I think, I'm pretty sure. And this intermediary position is, a lot of people think that they're buying things from Amazon, but in most cases, you're actually buying stuff from another seller, and Amazon is just acting as that intermediary between you. And I think they have lots of different ways of operating. In some cases, they're sending the order through to another company, or in some cases, the Amazon acts, I forget what they call it, but they're essentially a distributor for another company, so they already have the products there.
Yeah, you're like the storefront that actually stores the physical goods and then says, okay, I'll wait for my seller or figure out what to sell, and you're your own little shop.
Right. So, and then the third bullet about them been having an entrenched and durable position, which I think is it's very elegant language for this, but over the last two or 3 years, I think. So obviously a company like Amazon has been around for a while, so they meet all of those criteria. But the Digital Marketing Act goes on to specify particular services. Then also there's 10 of them, which include things like online search engines, social networks, video sharing platforms, operating systems, web browsers, stuff like that. So it's really focused on technology companies that are providing the main technologies that we think of today, which a lot of it is social networking, a lot of it is online purchases, YouTube, video sharing, stuff like that. So that's the scope.
I was a little
companies that are
curious
involved.
about, yeah, how the EU goes about determining say a new gatekeeper. I mean, they've coined their six, which we can get to after this, but if a new service were to emerge, like what would be the process of determining whether it's a gatekeeper or not? I think obviously it's not a gatekeeper if it's small and hasn't been around for a while. But I was wondering what that process would have been like. And there's a little snippet in there that the European Commission provided, which is that there's a 5-month long investigation to determine gatekeeper eligibility typically. And all it really says here is that it would, ascertain whether a substantial rebuttal was, I mean, these fancy words here, but summarizing it, if the company doesn't believe they're a gatekeeper, but say the EU does, they have a little period to justify why they don't believe they are. And if the EU has, I imagine, like overseen a detail or is working off, I don't know, not real facts, I can't imagine what a rebuttal would, mean in a rejection if we have enough justification to go start this investigation. But there is an opportunity to say, hey, no, we don't think we're gatekeepers and this is why. But I don't think that was the case for any of the 6 that were identified by the EU, at least for this rollout of DMA.
I know that so we're looking at I said there was kind of a rolling timeline of when it became into effect. So from my research, it first went into force on November 1st, 2022, and became applicable on May 2nd, 2023. So there was a 6-month period there. And so as of that date, May 2nd, 2023, I think is when all of these companies needed to submit something.
Probably that rebuttal.
Yeah, I guess it's a rebuttal, but like, there has to be some trigger that identifies what companies even have to submit that. Like, is it just because you're a technology company, or is it based on your size? Or, if I'm just if I own a gas station, do I have to? Like, obviously not.
There's
but like
no self-service form. Yeah.
Right. But at some point, there's got to be a gray area between the technology companies and other services. Like, the financial industry, they're providing a lot of these online services, but they're like, are they technology companies? So I don't have the answer to that question, but it's a really good question. I'll stop shaking my desk because the video is shaking here.
So exciting.
I know so, however, so the part that I do know is the companies that had to submit something when this went into effect on May 2nd, 2023, that gave you said a 5-month period, but by September of 2023, the European Union or the European Commission had made their determinations, and like you said, there were 6 companies that were selected, the big winners, who were designated gatekeepers, and those 6 companies were Alphabet, most people know that as Google, Amazon, Apple, ByteDance, which most people know as TikTok, Meta, which most people know as Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and other things, and Microsoft. So those are the 6 companies. And then there was different products within those companies that were, core platforms that, fell into the DMA. But there were specific things that were not found to be gatekeeping services. So, for example, Gmail was not, which I find surprising, but I guess it doesn't meet the criteria because it's not really an intermediary. It's just an email service. Right. Outlook.com, which is also an email service from a different company. And then the Samsung Internet browser, which is interesting because other browsers were included. Chrome and Safari were browsers that are included. So
I wonder, and I was trying to read between the lines because I was surprised about Gmail, and I was surprised to not see iOS Messenger at all here. And I want to assume it's because they're not, and I saw this as one qualifier of DMA as being a number independent interpersonal communication service. And I don't know why I didn't click right away, but just meaning that you don't need a phone number or a phone plan to use that messaging service. And I wonder if that was a carve out there, because I don't see those falling under any other categories as well. I mean, cloud.
Well, I did services. Yeah, so I did find that they're continuing to investigate 4 specific services. Those are Bing, Edge, Microsoft's advertising, and Apple iMessage. So is that what you meant by iOS?
Yeah, like they weren't sure yet, but that understandably could still be ongoing, and maybe there's enough justification during that first round to say, hey, we need a rebuttal again. I don't know.
Right. So now that those 6 companies have been selected as the big winners, I'm sure that they don't feel like big winners, because I'm sure it's just a lot of work for them.
Yes.
But gatekeepers now have until March 6th, 2024 to comply with all of the provisions. So get to work, those 6 companies.
There are clearly benefits here, or else one of our more renowned regional area folks over in the EU wouldn't be proposing such massive legislation on some of the most profitable and well-known companies across the world. Just going on a whim here, I interpreted a lot of any anti-competition, antitrust laws being better for innovation, consumer protection, with added competition, and more inclusive economic growth, since I think especially technology is very heavily sourced from the US and from China as of recently. So to me, that screams more of the importance to make sure that everyone is participating in this global economy fairly and through consistent rules that the EU reflects through other areas of their treaties and their their legal doctrines. So what are benefits that you anticipate coming out of DMA?
Well, I think that the real benefit is that I think that these companies need to separate their role as the provider or seller of some of the end services that we think of. So I'll frame this from my view of Amazon perspective. So Amazon is a seller of products, okay, but it's also this gatekeeper. It's a host that puts buyers and sellers together. I think it needs to separate those 2 functions that it provides. Obviously, it's selling products. The products that it has don't even make things. I don't know
if they do anymore. I remember that being a possibility many years ago.
Yeah. Anyway, so but separate that from the fact that they're a gatekeeper of putting people together, and not putting the part of their company that sells things ahead of other companies that sell things in its gatekeeper role. So as a gatekeeper, it's putting buyers and sellers together. Buyers and sellers need to be able to get together fairly, no matter who they are. So Amazon can't make it easier for me to get to Amazon as a seller than to get to a different company as a seller. And I listened to a podcast recently that talked about some of the practices
about a podcast. Very meta.
I know it was about Amazon's practices of really trying to drive down prices. And like if they had somebody was selling a product on their platform and they found the price cheaper somewhere else, like that the company was selling their product cheaper on a different platform than on Amazon, they presented the information differently on the website, so it was less likely that people would buy things from them. So that to me sounds like an unfair practice. They're putting in one method over another, right, for like one seller, one provider versus another. So overall, I think that as a consumer, it should make it easier for me to get to whatever companies that I want to buy products from.
Right. The analogy I think of, you were talking about Amazon, and I've made this in my mind with interpreting this. It's kind of like having a Amazon mall, and all of your stores are all the plenty of variety of stores from your naked eye, but in the background, in the stocking room, and where the actual transactions are taking place in these stores, it's all Amazon. But we think they're different services, and they're different providers and sellers with their own benefits and their own competition between one another, and it's just an illusion, right? So I totally agree that we need to increase transparency to tell both individuals and then businesses operating in that environment who's actually in charge of what, and an equal priority on things like ranking algorithms and search algorithms through those platforms.
Yeah, well, it's true. But the reality is that if you want to sell things online, one of the places that you can probably do that most successfully is through Amazon.
Yeah, they have that economy of scale built already. They have all their users there. You don't have to bring someone to another third website, fourth website. It's like instinctive to people at this point.
Right. And I can't imagine, like, it might be possible, for example, for Walmart to be able to lure people to a different website than Amazon's and sell products. But they, again, they've got the economies of scale. Walmart doesn't show up on the list here, but I'm not sure how big they are across Europe. And also they don't tout
Yeah,
themselves as
across
being a
Europe for
technology
sure.
company. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, so yeah, I think so. My answer to your question, I actually want to get to the next part of what are the rules. So on the European Commission website, lists some examples of dues that the gatekeep platforms have to do, and one is to allow third parties to interoperate with the gatekeeper's own service in certain specific situations, allow their business users to access the data that they generate in their use of the gatekeeper's platform. So they're essentially being open and transparent with their customers. Provide companies advertising on their platform with the tools and information necessary for advertisers and publishers to carry out their own independent verification of their advertisements hosted by the gatekeeper. And the last one that they list was to allow their business users to promote their offer and conclude contracts with their customers outside the gatekeeper's platform. So I can use the gatekeeper's platform to establish a connection with a customer, but then it's okay for me to take that relationship offline and not have to work through the gatekeeper to have that relationship on continue to operate.
Yeah.
So
that very last do was actually new to me in my research. So say, I'm going to use the Amazon example. I'm looking for footwear on Amazon. Result from Birkenstock pops up. I'm buying sandals for my partner.
Sure.
I go to purchase the shoes and I can go through Amazon, or perhaps there's another link to buy it through Birkenstock, for example. That's maybe clear and inconspicuous to me as I'm entering the website. Is that how you're picturing it?
Yeah, I guess, as long as I think that they're just looking for fairness in the ways that happens. Because unfortunately, and I'm guilty of doing this myself, is I'll go to a website that belongs to a company that makes something to look for the products that I want, and then I'll go to Amazon to see if I can get it cheaper somewhere else. And in a lot of cases you can't. Well,
yeah, Amazon's a cheaper one.
Yeah.
I've had that experience too, and it actually makes me wonder about, and I don't know how this will play out. I guess we'll just have to see, but any adverse consequences for, and now aside from consumer protections for things like privacy and security, but for like pricing for us, right? If we cease to have an Amazon, which has taken advantage of the lack of these rules, whether morally, wrong or not is kind of outside the question here, but they have this advantage of having all of the data to figure out how much something costs, where to boost it in my algorithm, what I've bought in the past. And they're able to extract that into a way that can make a product cheaper for me. Whether I know how is kind of indifferent. It could be cheaper arbitrarily or artificially, or it could really be less expensive and they still make a profit off of it. Now that they essentially won't be able to compete in the way of having this information asymmetry, will that mean greater prices for us as consumers? Maybe in the short term, but I wonder if over the long term it'll settle out as companies that are targeting users figure out how to basically play, against in a classical competition sense and outside of this weird Amazon world we've been in for a while. But I have no idea how that's going to work. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't know that we'll ever actually know the answer. Like, did
I don't have enough
prices go
information
up as a result?
to make a determination on that right now.
Because I think that the reality is, like, you could say that in some ways Amazon has had a monopoly, but they've also achieved that by being purposeful about keeping prices low. I think that's one of their main goals: is keep prices low. Usually you would say that when there's greater competition, prices are more likely to go down for consumers. But in this case, you make a really good point that Amazon won't be able to do what Amazon does, which essentially drives prices down.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think in the end, I think competition is good, and we do want the smaller emerging, even the smaller mom and pop companies to be able to survive and thrive.
Not have to
And
wait to be
honestly,
acquired by one of these big
yeah,
gatekeepers or online platforms to achieve that.
right. And if I have to pay just a little bit more, I'm not willing to pay a lot more, but if I have to pay a little bit more for that to be true, then I'm okay with that.
As well as the consumer protections that come with not just paying a little bit more, but with the package of this regulation, which brings us to the examples of the don'ts. Should I go ahead and cover those?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Okay. So gatekeeper platforms can no longer treat services or products offered by gatekeepers more favorably in terms of ranking. So more services or products. So really everything we covered. You can't put Amazon as one and Birkenstock as two, in my example.
Yeah.
Prevent customers from linking businesses outside of their platform. So it's the inverse of the last do we talked about, which is you can't block access to Birkenstock.com. You can't prevent users from uninstalling any pre-installed software app if they wish to. So that goes back to kind of the Microsoft example. I know it's, in their operating system, but probably a better example is Apple or Google in their phones. So if I don't want, my Notes app anymore because it's taking 0.05 gigabytes, I don't know, for any reason, I should be able to remove it. And then last, track users outside of their gatekeeper's core platform service for the purpose of targeted advertising. And this is really interesting to me because I think quite a few gatekeepers fall under kind of the category of the ability to do this. And of course, without effective consent being granted. So you can't treat consent in one place as consent in another as far as following you for targeted advertising means. So I'll just keep using the Amazon Birkenstock example. If I go out and I go to Birkenstock.com, Amazon can't, without giving me very clear and informed consent, track me online for the purpose of figuring out, building my platform on Amazon.com, figuring out what I'll buy next, how much I paid for those shoes, right? They can't do that without my consent.
Yeah, fair, nor should they. And all of this makes me wonder, did Birkenstock pay you to mention them this many times?
No, and I can clear that up. I do love their shoes though, and I am probably wearing some 50% of the time. I'm not in a formal or workouting.
Okay. Well, maybe if this episode goes viral, maybe you should reach out to them and ask for some free product.
It'd be a couple days too late because I did buy some as a gift. So maybe I could have done this an episode ago.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All right, let's talk about consequences. So the consequences for companies, and this hasn't come up yet because these 6 companies were just identified in September. They have until March 6th to comply, and I suspect that there's going to be a period of time that before they're not going to come in on March 7th and say you don't comply. So I would imagine that they would have to observe their behavior for a period of time.
But perhaps lawsuits might prop up because this is, publicly available information to us. Who knows who's prepared to, but ideally we've changed our practice. Sorry, we as in the companies have changed their practices beforehand. I'm just remembering when GDPR came out, it was, I don't think, a month before Max Schrems came out with a lawsuit citing GDPR. And
so so you're raising a question that I'm kicking myself that I didn't include this in my research of is there a private right of action included in this law? And I don't know the answer to that. So the GDPR very specifically had a private right of action which allowed for your example, Max Schrems, to sue, I think it was Facebook at the time, immediately, like day one. I don't know if the DMA has a private right of action, so I'm going to take that as a homework item to do some research on that. However, so with the consequences for companies, eventually, fines of up to 10% of the company's total worldwide annual turnover, or up to 20% in the event of repeated infringements. So to put that in scope, so Google, according to my research, for their annual revenue for 2022 was $279.8 billion. So if they were fined 10% of that, $28 billion, or on the higher end, 20% if it was a repeated infringement, $56 billion.
That's quite a range, but the range starts pretty high.
It is. So I can't imagine a company being, I don't know what the highest fine, I know it is, it's in the billions. I don't know what the highest fine a company has
I
paid
don't know
for
if
an
it's
infringement
double
of something.
digit billions though. That's where I would be surprised if I hadn't heard about that yet, especially with respect to technology companies.
Right. I mean, the largest one I'm aware of is 5 billion. We won't talk too much about that, but I can't imagine. So 10% of any company's total worldwide annual revenue that's huge.
I wonder what the
there's
logic was for this too. I wonder if I mean, there's private right of action, as you pointed out, in other legislation, but I wonder if, say, GDPR is 4% fines, we have a few years to reflect on it. Perhaps as a deterrent, it's not enough given the revenue of these technology companies and their really ability to grow off of sidestepping these rules in a future where they are fined. Because in reality, the reason why technology companies listed as gatekeepers are so powerful is a lot to do with their revenue and their ability to invest early and often and kind of name their own price for any acquisition. And perhaps this is a penalty to try to reverse that, is in, hey, like this should be a scary fine for not just anyone, but for tech companies as well.
Yeah, and I suspect there's some scare tactic in there also, because like, the way it's listed is that the fines are up to 10%. I don't know what their actual, calculation would be of how much the fines would,
and I'm sure those
be.
fines get lower as investigations are done and there's proof of maybe an attempt to, comply with rules. And I know there are a lot of factors that are uncovered through the kind of administrative side of the investigation that can, in some cases, lower it from the initial, like, oh, this is about to be a $1.4 billion fine, and then eventually it becomes a $500 million one. I wonder if the same thing would happen here in the event of enforcement.
Yeah, I would hope, and I suspect that the highest fines would be for a company that just chooses to ignore the law altogether, and then they get told, well, no, you really need to do this, and they get fined, and still ignore it. So yeah, I think it's a scare tactic to get companies to comply. But based on just things that I've read in the industry, that companies really are getting ready for it.
Yeah.
These 6 companies in particular, I'm sure there's going to be others in the future, but I think companies are taking it seriously. But I guess we'll know after March 6th.
Yep. So where else are we at on dates? Because I know we had a few, gatekeepers in 2024. Yeah, that's our last one. And then I guess we'll have to do a follow-up with enforcement actions. But we covered why. We covered enforcement. Should we talk about the DSA and the relationship with DMA a bit more next? I know.
Well, there was an actual quote from one of the articles. Oh no, it wasn't an article. So in the DMA starts off with a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo, and then it has just the word whereas ... and goes through like a whole bunch of different provisions. I think there was like 109 of them, but one of them I think it was whereas number 2. It said an example of such characteristics of core platform services is extreme scale economies, which often result from nearly zero marginal costs and add business users or end users, which is really kind of pointing out just the reality of the monopoly that they hold. For another company to come in and try and generate users costs them a lot.
What's a small expense for a large company with all these servers already ready to take in the traffic is a way larger undertaking for a small startup attempting to maybe be a better Google that just doesn't have the infrastructure for it yet. And then also the user adoption because of the lack of infrastructure that makes other parts of the service more convenient because it's cheaper.
Yeah. Okay. I think you were trying to get us on track there. So let's compare it to the Digital Services Act. So what's the key difference in your mind
in my research?
Yeah.
Well, in quotes, the main goal is to prevent illegal and harmful activities online and the spread of disinformation. That was one quote I took. I mean, it's very straightforward enough, but also ensuring user safety, protecting fundamental rights, and creating a fair and open online platform environment, which I see a lot of overlaps between, obviously, the DMA, protection of fundamental rights and protecting end users, gives a lot of GDPR vibes. But it went into effect, I saw, in August 2023 for very large online platforms, the VLOPs. These can be social media platforms, online marketplaces, and search engines.
Yeah, and to be clear, so now that we're moving into a different law, the Digital Marketing Act applied to only those 6 companies because they're gatekeepers.
Right.
But the Digital Services Act applies to a much broader scope of companies that are providing different things. And the key difference that I saw is that the DMA like really seemed to be controlling competition and limiting monopolies, whereas the Digital Services Act is really looking at the functions and how these platforms operate. So the key provisions are about content moderation, mechanisms for handling user complaints, transparency of algorithms, which I want to come back to that. Mm-hmm. Cooperation with authorities, and measures to prevent spreading illegal content. So it's more about how these platforms operate and what's out there. And
it echoes a lot of concerns I think the US is attempting to address in state and even some nationally proposed legislation with respect to, yes, algorithmic use of algorithms in kind of social media platforms in circumstances, but also the profiling of children using these services as well, and the protection of minors on any online platform in the EU. And there are a plethora of more child safety oriented bills flying around, but this seems to take a very close and special look at social media and, like we said, the rules and recommendation systems with respect to minors and adults in the transparency sense.
Yeah, agreed. And clearly both of us feel very strongly about protecting minors online. Like, we've done a whole episode about it here and probably talk about it every time we do a chat. But one of the things that struck me is the transparency of algorithms. I think it's important, and not a whole lot of people pay attention to it because really very few people even understand what algorithms are and how it affects how these platforms work. Mm-hmm. I stumbled across something on the European Commission's website when I was looking, that this April 2023, the Commission launched the European Center for Algorithmic Transparency, which said it was the first of its kind scientific center, which will support the Commission and national authorities in the monitoring of the compliance with the DSA. And I'm going to go through some lists of what this Commission, or what this European Center for Algorithmic Transparency, ECAT, will do. It's going to conduct technical tests on algorithmic systems to understand their functioning, analyze transparency reports, risk assessments, and independent audits, support investigations and inspections, identify emerging risks associated with the use of very large online platforms, and act as a knowledge hub for research conducted thanks to access to data provided by the DSA. So I think they're really going to be the eyes and ears of representing us of what's happening with these algorithms, because we don't understand it of what the impact of them can be. I don't know. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, the algorithm aspect of it and how it's shaping society, I think, I'm not proposing this, but I could do a whole episode about that because it's just one of the most perplexing phenomenons to me in human history, about how we have what Orwell would have called thinking machines right in our hands, right? They're great resources, but the fact that there is a third party determining what you will see and process. And again, if you're on social media, that's kind of your whole purpose. I'm there to look at photos, read stuff, right? It's determining for me based on my best interests, but there's kind of an illusion of agency on what my best interest is based on, yes, my previous history, what I've liked, however the service decides to weight my interactions against my profile and determine what I want next. That I'm really struggling to see a world or a reality where outside of me maybe having control over things I don't want to see and having more clear options based on the content I'm looking at, how algorithmic transparency will work. Because I think on one end, it's intellectual property in a lot of cases, right? If you figure out how to optimize for what users want to see, like that's a whole product in and of itself. It's essentially what TikTok has done for videos, amongst a whole host of other data. But it could be arguably intellectual property, but it's also one that is so complex and embedded in so many different, very minute data types and interactions that I mean, it would be hard to really process that for me. And how would you display that to me as I'm using the service? It's always thinking and it's always consuming my interactions and my peers' interactions. And I think I can say this for all social media. So a lot of jumble to say. I'm really interested to see how that works, this algorithmic transparency idea.
Yeah, because I think that what people don't realize is that these algorithms, without you knowing it, are able to control what you think and what you do as a result of that. I mean,
it shapes your worldview in a way. If I'm on a platform and I expect it to be very even and universally available information, but I'm the only one being served that pattern of content, then it's not really a real reflection of the real world. It's my real world based on what a very smart system has determined that I most likely will want to see, not guaranteed. I get it wrong all the time. But yes, it influences you. And I think that over time, when it compounds on enough information, it can get you down into these terrible wormholes of just, yes, disinformation is a concern on here for sure, but it can do it in a way that kind of masks it as, hey, this is normal, this is life. A lot of people think, act, work like you, and this is another interest you might, find compelling, and it's maybe something completely wrong and made up, and we have no tools to kind of assess that unless we were explicitly told, hey, this is I don't know, something you saw because you liked Birkenstocks and now you're, I don't know, left field in this other content. But you know what I'm saying.
I do. And I think so. When I was looking at this, when I was into this rabbit hole on the algorithmic stuff, there was a conference that this organization, the ECAT, held earlier this year. And one of the, I don't know if he was a keynote speaker or introducing something, but his name was Mikel Landabasso, Director of Fair and Sustainable Economy for the Joint Research Center. And part of it really struck me what he said in his intro. He was talking about why we're here today. And this is an exact quote from his speech. And he said, algorithms are here to stay. They are here influencing the way we think, the things we read, the people we follow, the things we buy, the people we vote for, and sometimes they are telling us what to think. And the scary part, and he's right, but the scary part about it is all of that happens without us even realizing it has happened. Like we think something, and I think, well, that's what I think. But you don't realize you're thinking that because you were influenced into thinking that because you were, and it just happened subliminally in some ways that you don't even realize it. Or, and it's not even because of what you were shown, maybe it's because of what you weren't shown. Like if you're only ever shown Birkenstocks, you never ever know
conflicting
about,
evidence. To know that other shoes exist.
Exactly. So so now I need some product from Birkenstock too. So I mentioned
this is a whole marketing campaign right here.
I hope one of our listeners knows somebody there and reaches out and says, "Hey, you got to listen to this."
There. No, I mean, that's really true. There's nothing we don't rely on information for some source of information for. And I'm speaking kind of broadly. Sorry, I don't. But I think a lot of individuals can feel that way, especially when you're put in a world where now, and this is maybe outside of DSA, but the most ideal way to sign up for new online services could be a login portal through one of these applications. So you basically have one there to use later, or you've already had it. So there's much more dependence being built on central platforms. And, it's scary that they can amass this much information about you without a lot more, and they're getting better, but more formal tools to help you control what you see and don't want to see. But it's not like I can sift through all, however some billion of content and say, yes, no, yes, no. It has to do that reach for me based on its massive neural networks of other profiles that interacted similar to me. but it's important because I think the more time goes on, and many books have been written on this, we can steer in a world where our agency is just eroded more and more based on how much convenience we give up for, products or finding information, seeking it. But there's always a bit of abstraction that needs to be removed to get me what I want the soonest. And the more that's removed, the more it's on the obligation of the service to tell me that, which I don't think I want either. I think we're all happy to be in a world where we can freely exchange information that's not through what were classically the very siloed information sources, which were cable news, radio. Seems like we did this explosion, and now if we kind of keep going that direction, we'll start siloing ourselves back to the few, I don't know, channels we had on TV, if I'm making an analogy, pre-internet.
No, agreed. And I think the bottom line, though, is we need these large platforms to exist. The things that we enjoy in life today are because these large companies provide them for us. And I would like to say we have to trust them, but it should be more than that. I think that these laws are, essentially setting the rules for the playground about how we're going to operate.
Forcing the mitigation of risk ahead of time.
Yeah. So, and hopefully like these companies will come along and they'll comply and, they'll continue to thrive, and I'll still be able to buy stuff from Amazon, and you can get your Birkenstocks, and I can watch things on YouTube and, different social media platforms, and, we can keep doing all of those things, but do it in a way that it's fair for other companies to participate in the market. And I'm not being controlled or influenced in a way that I don't want to be. So, because I don't want to see content that I shouldn't be seeing, and I don't want to be manipulated. I want my own
a balance
freedoms
for everyone. Yes,
right, freedoms. So anyway, and I think that's what privacy all comes back to is freedoms and rights and privileges for natural humans, right? Isn't that what
absolutely
it's about?
Yes.
Okay, well, we went down a couple of rabbit holes, but
as always,
I know it was a good chat. So
for everyone listening, we aim for 20-minute episodes, and somehow it turns into 40, and we're just.
I think we went over that. Yeah,
I know. Well, anyway. There was a lot of content here. I'll give us a break, and a lot of great stories. So, with that, thank you for watching, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening or watching, however you're consuming this, and tune in next time. We have no idea what we're talking about next time, but we'll figure it out.
We'll know before then.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Bye,
Rachel.